it to be an engaging conversation. It will be more of a dialogue. There will definitely be time and space for that. But I am going to show a few brief slides, so bear with me as I bring them up. Okay. I don't know if this will work in presentation mode. I will try, but if you're not able to see my screen, Sarah Beth, you're the only person I can see on my screen, so will you let me know if you can see them once I show it in this view?
I got it.
Can you see my slides like this?
It says loading right now.
Okay. Okay, well, I can never show it in slideshow mode, so sorry that the slides will be a little smaller, but I'm happy to share them as well in the chat or after the meeting for anyone who wants to follow along. Try to make them a little bigger, I'm sorry. Okay. So tonight we're here to talk about BIPOC retention and with a special focus on support for Black women. I'm Danielle Hammond. I work as the Student Success and Retention Specialist on the Seattle campus. I'm also a student in the EDD program and an alum of the MAED program, Masters of Education program on the Seattle campus. A lot of the work that I do here at Antioch has to do with students' connection and the campus climate. So, and I feel like those are very important keys to retention. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. That's what attracts me to this conversation. That's what brings me to this conversation. And also my doctoral research is pertaining to a similar topic. So I'm very happy to share a little bit about what I know, but more so come together and have a collaborative conversation about the topic. So that's who I am, Angela.
Hi, everyone. I'm Angela, and I am an adjunct faculty member in the Seattle campus in the counselor master's level counseling program, CMHC program here. I'm also a student in the counselor education and supervision program, a PhD student at Antioch, Seattle. So that's a little bit about my connection to Antioch, but I'm in practice, I'm a licensed professional clinical counselor. So in some places that's known as a licensed mental health counselor. I have a private practice here and I'm in Cleveland, Ohio. So I have a private practice here in Ohio and we provide care, specialize in providing care to marginalized folks. I specialize in providing services to Black women, specifically Black women in leadership roles. And that's what a lot of my research is centered around. So that's what makes this a very special topic for me as well, especially considering some of the things we've been hearing about in terms of Black women in academia today. So really excited to hear some of your experiences and to share in community about a very important topic today. Thank you for having me.
And as we were saying, we do want this to be an engaging discussion in a safe space for sharing. Also excited to dig in. So let's lay some context. Let's talk about why we're having this discussion. We right now, or for decades now, BIPOC presence in academia has been increasing. And BIPOC students, something that we know that supports their retention is representation. So tonight we're talking about, I'm going to give some data and some statistics about BIPOC presence, representation, and we're going to talk about recruitment and why we can't just, retention, and why we just can't talk about recruitment, but it's important to understand and discuss retention as well. So we're academics and we like datas and stats. So just I have some to share. I'm looking off the side because that's where my notes are. So there are about 40% of undergrad students are students of color. And that in 1980s, it was about 80%. So for the past few decades, we have been seeing an increase in BIPOC students and a decrease in white students on campuses. In 2022, for the first time ever, there was less than 50% of students were white. There are currently about 43% of white students on college campuses, 40% of BIPOC, and then the rest are unknown. And that's important to know because as the demographic shifts, so does the needs of the institution. And it's good news that the BIPOC students are increasing, but faculty of color rates have not increased as fast as students of color have increased. For faculty, it's about 1 in 4 of faculty of color, and 3 in 4 of faculty are white. So representation isn't quite there, though there is some, and of the representation that exists, we really need to know how to keep them there. Their voice really matters. So tonight, this is about student representation, but I'm talking more collectively on how to support faculty and staff as well, and how faculty and staff support the connection between faculty and staff support and that of students. So representation, literature confirms, or it supports that representation helps, a diverse campus helps students socially and economically. I thought that it was really interesting that the National Bureau of Economic Research shows a positive correlation between attending a racially diverse institution and future earning potential. And I think colleges have recognized that they need to diversify their campuses, which is why diversity statements exist. And there's a lot of rhetoric around it. There's not always a lot of understanding of what it takes to retain. And that's because it really requires like transforming the organization. And that is a difficult thing to do, but a necessary thing to do, and especially as we are certainly seeing more students of color navigating college campuses. So many colleges, they recognize the importance, yet 1 in 4 students still say their college needs to develop DEI strategies. This is just a visual of what I just said. 40% of students are BIPOC students, 25% in faculty, and about 11% of those students are Black, identify as Black. And we can't really talk about, so when we talk about retention, we're talking about the campus climate as well as students' connections. And when we're having conversations about those things, we have to talk about the DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging work. So a lot of those conversations go hand in hand, and that's often why you see me in a lot of spaces that have to do with the anti-racist work happening on the campus. Like I'm a part of the anti-racist task force. I'm on the Black Student Union. I really take advantage of any opportunity I can to join conversations about the DEI work happening, because I understand how interconnected that is with supporting students' success and retention, particularly that of marginalized communities. So in literature has there have been BIPOC students since the 1800s on college campuses. And since the late 1800s, college campuses have been having conversations and trying to figure out how to support them. And we haven't figured it out yet. But what that means is that there are studies that tell us about BIPOC experiences, BIPOC retention barriers and strategies. So I didn't really want to spend too much of tonight's conversation focusing on those things. That is really connected to the work I do and connected to my research, so I can nerd out about it and talk a long time. But I just kind of want to highlight some main themes and things here, which are that all of these words in front of you are words that are typically associated with the experience of BIPOC students as they navigate college campuses. And these things also serve as retention barriers. So there are also strategies that literature points to. This is from the Boston University, and it's a 10-point plan for diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. And I like this because this is like a comprehensive view of all the different categories or aspects or ways that the work needs to be happening in order for it to be effective. And this work is so deeply connected with retention and success and support for marginalized communities. A lot of more specific retention strategies that you'll find in literature, like mentorship programs, et cetera, kind of fall here under campus climate and culture. But we need change, we need movement, we need equity advance in all of these aspects. So I thought this was a cool chart. Let me make sure I'm not missing anything. Yes, so retention strategies, there is literature around it, and there is work happening. There have been advancements, but it's continuous. We have to continue to have these conversations. We have to continue to try new things. The needle is always moving. This is an ongoing effort. So I want to show a video. Now I want to show a video about, this is like a 3-minute TikTok. And I think it does a really good job of breaking down some of the experiences that happen. More specifically, this creator is talking more specifically about the experiences of Black women. She ties it to some recent events, and she poses a question, or a question has emerged from this video that I would like to use to open up conversation tonight. I can't show this in full screen, so I am so sorry that it is so small, but please listen to it and we will discuss.
Academia is traumatizing and harming Black women. Recently, Dr. Antoinette Bonnie.
Oops, sorry.
Academia is traumatizing and harming Black women. Recently, Dr. Antoinette Bonnie Candia Bailey, who was the vice president of student affairs at Lincoln University, Missouri, took her own life after experiencing extreme bullying and harassment from the university's president. This comes on the heels of the high-profile deaths of 2 other Black women in academia. In September of last year, both Dr. Joanne Epps passed away and Dr. Orinthia Montag passed away. And as Dr. Keisha Thomas talks about in her article in Forbes, many speculated how chronic stress from academia could have led to their untimely death. Further, last year, Dr. Imani Perry wrote the op-ed for New York Times called A Dangerously High Threshold for Pain, where she talks about how the chronic stress of academia and the amount of perfection that was required from her in her PhD meant that she actually missed the pain of her lupus. And so because she was under so much chronic stress, she was disconnected from her body. And she talks about the relationship between illness and chronic stress in this very beautiful article. Actually a term for the way that the workforce slowly erodes Black women's health, and it's called weathering. And fascinatingly, one of the women in this Business Insider article says this: I feel like every once in a while I wind up getting into a role, and then over time having more on my plate than anybody else. And it doesn't come with more time off, or additional pay, or reevaluation of the role. She also noted that she feels the extreme pressure of being micromanaged and the weathering impact of microaggression. When I talk about Black women's inclusion in the workforce, when I talk about pay equity for Black women, when I talk about equitable workload distribution for Black women, these things are genuinely life or death. These are not just things that I talk about because they're important for the productivity of an organization. They are integral to the well-being of Black women everywhere. And there's not a lot of conversation about how demoralizing and dehumanizing it feels when you're working twice as hard as your colleagues at your job, but you're still getting negative feedback, and it's unclear where this feedback is coming from. Black women are often giving harsh and belittling feedback under the guise of making them better. But there's not a lot of conversation about what it means when that Black woman goes home and has to sit with that feedback. There's not a lot of conversation about what it means when a manager's negative feedback becomes a Black woman's inner monologue. I used to work in academia, and I actually left academia because the stress was so severe, it led to an autoimmune condition for me. And so I deeply understand how within academia, Black women's workloads become untenable, leads to real physical health and mental health implications for Black women in the workforce. I am thinking so much of Dr. Antoinette, Bonnie, Candia Bailey's family. My heart goes out to them. And I'm also thinking of all the other Black women who have been deeply harmed by academic systems. I myself am a product of Black women's scholarship. It is Black women in academia who have loved me. It is my Black women professors who have sat with me, who have talked with me, who have not just helped me become a better scholar, but a better person, who have helped me understand the intersection of scholarship and love and liberation. We need Black women in the academy. We need Black women's imaginaries. We need Black women's scholarship. We need Black women's thought leadership, but not like this. We need to respect Black women's bodies as sacred. We need to respect Black women's well-being as divine. And that means transforming our organizational structures. And that starts with really evaluating how we talk to Black women in these spaces. Dr. Bailey did not deserve to be belittled by LU's president the way that she was. And we need to really think critically about how we engage with Black women in academia and beyond.
So what resonates to me, some things that come out of this is mental health and physical wellness, some recent events in self-care, Black scholarship, and community and mentorship. And the question at the end was, how can we engage in more supportive ways? So we will now open the floor for discussion. I do have a question that I want to hear from the BIPOC women in the room. I want to know more specifically from you, how are you engaging in self-care, and what advice do you have to other Black BIPOC women for connecting to community and mentorship? So I can't see anybody. I'm going to stop. That's the end of my slideshow. Happy Black History Month. I'm going to stop the share so we can now have a discussion. What are your reactions? What did you notice? What was your awareness prior to watching this video? Is there anything resonating from this the themes that I highlighted, or anything else in the presentation that you would like to discuss?
Danielle, someone asked if you could put the link to the video in the chat as well.
Yes.
Okay. And feel free to just chime in here if you have reactions or thoughts. I thought I saw Sarah Beth about to say something.
I was just going to mention the video that you mentioned.
Okay, thank you. I want to highlight what Danielle shared about the mental health, specifically because I'm a counselor, right? I love that stuff. The mental health implications that the video discussed, and just in general, I think one of the things that I came up were the retention barriers, right? And one of the first things that's listed is isolation, right? So that's what we're talking about here, like the importance of community and mentorship and creating a safe space for folks to want to stay in these environments. A big part of that is representation and not feeling like they're doing it on their own, not being able to identify someone who they feel like have done this before, right? That they can relate to. That alone gives people that motivation and to feel like they can do it and to feel like they want to stay in that environment. Anyone care to add to that or have thoughts around like mentorship and community and how that helps when we talk about the mental health implications attached to some of this stuff?
Hi, Jacqueline. I see your hand.
Hi, sweetie. How you doing? Hello, everyone. Sorry. It was just 2 seconds.
Please.
I the video was amazing and it does outline exactly everything that's happening. Unfortunately, there were no surprises in the video. And in my case, I think almost all of us know going in that those are the conditions that you're going to experience when you're in the BIPOC community and you're on an academic campus in higher learning. You expect every last one of the things that she mentioned, including knowing that your health, your time, and your pay is going to be impacted. With that said, so you can't anticipate how much it's going to affect you because for whatever reason, there are some areas that might affect you more than others. In my case, I feel that I understood it and I gave into it. And I tried to make it something that even though I know these things are going to be impacted, it was going to be a good experience for myself as well as for my students. And I monopolized my time that I offer, and the time that I offer the office and the time that I offer the student is different. And I made sure that I balanced that in a certain way. So I had a good time, and I knew that there was going to be criticism, but if my students were graduating, I was like, bring it. I don't know. I know there's gonna be someone that's gonna be unhappy, including the students. There's gonna be students that are even unhappy with us as counselors and mentors on a campus. Because we can't address everything. But just trying to be there is, I think, the biggest part, and being present and having people on campus, having more people of color on campuses so that you have that fluctuation and people can get a break if they need it. That's what makes a difference. And among us, there were only 5 or 6 of us's on a campus of 8,900 students. And in that, there were just over 1,000 that were BIPOC. So we had our work cut out for us. And there are, and you have to be intentional and in people's faces, I think, so that the memory is there and changes are made. And it's not, like you said, it's not easy. So I don't know. Other than that, I can't really think of. The kids are graduating and they're getting to where they needed to be. I was happy. I'm willing to take a hit.
Thank you, Jacqueline. That was so interesting to hear you say that. It's almost like student recruitment or having students representation is just as important to the faculty retention. And I've talked to some of my own faculty who've told me before, you know, I'm here because of you, because of y'all, because I need to be here for the next generation and the next folks that are coming through, to kind of be there to support them through that. So it's almost like it works together. The faculty are there for the students, and the students are somewhat there for the faculty as well, in that community, from that community aspect. And then the other thing that you mentioned, I heard you say is you take a hit, right? And that's another piece of this. And a lot of the research shows that a lot of times Black BIPOC folks, they're doing more with less, right? We got to do more with less resources. So you talked about that, and you talked about caregiving and self-sacrifice being a big part of what it means to be a part of a community where there's not enough representation.
Yeah, it is very true, and like you said, with the representation, building the partnerships, I think, was the best part of me because if I couldn't get something done, I don't mind crossing the aisle, whether it's within the institution or within the community, to get a student what they need. For my students, I reached out to the district attorney in our areas because I had a student that was pre-law. And I was like, well, might as well start at the top and see if they could intern with him for about a week. And that made a difference. I mean, she's a successful lawyer now in Wisconsin, and I'm happy that she was able to do that. But we have to ask for help. I think that's when we ask for help, we're a lot of times we may be asking for people that are automatically going to give us a no, or there's constraints behind it with budgets or other factors that aren't always outlined and explained. So sometimes it's good to find a yes somewhere else and try to balance it. Collaboration as somebody, that's one of the key factors. And making sure that whatever aspect or contract that we enter into, we can deliver somehow. And if we can't, we have to be able to say no. We have to be brave enough to say no.
Jacqueline, I learned so much from you. I'm happy that you're here to contribute to this conversation tonight. I love that you're talking about the way that you advocate for your students. I think that is so important, but it makes me think about like the emotional toll that work has, and how like sometimes that's not sustainable for us to do without adequate support. So how do you navigate that? What do you do if you felt burnout, or when you feel burnout? Like how do you keep going?
For me, because I had such a personal relationship with the students, a lot of the time I would have conversations with them. I did Stephen Covey 360 personality test among myself and that student, so that we could understand how we're communicating with one another and how we can make it better. I use Stephen Covey a lot. They usually had to read the book for teens when they started in the program. And we just spent a lot of time together on the campus, which now is a little bit more difficult. We have to be more purposeful. But just in simple observations and being present, even if I didn't say anything, it made them more comfortable with me, which automatically lowered a certain amount of stress. And I had other people that I could go to on the campus and figure out things quickly enough to impact something, which also brings down the stress. So, and I have a pretty good husband whose ears are broken. I must say that too, because the students were at our house a lot of times, and in between me and the students, then and he was also very resourceful in ideas and in the collaboration process. If he heard something and says, "Hey, look, I know somebody who knows somebody. Let's see if we can do it this way." and help with job searches and everything. And the retention, I worked closely with multicultural affairs and with the admissions office and at different times of the year. So that it was, I guess it boils down to the collaborations helped with my stress level.
Yeah, having a community in a safe space.
Yes. And even now, in the North County here where I am in San Diego, the women that are in the North County African American Women's Association, you don't see just brown faces. You see everyone. So the girls that we are mentoring, as well as the women that are involved, because it's a women's organization, they all have an idea of what to say, what not to say, what to do, what not to do, and the end in mind. And it's the end in mind that always brings us back to the what to say, what not to say, what to do, and what not to do. And it keeps us on track.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Anyone else want to maybe share experiences of, oh, Clarence, I see your hand up.
I'm gonna try to let you guys see me, but I'm having Wi-Fi issues, so I may have to come off camera again. I cannot speak on behalf of students per se. I can only speak as a witness to what I've seen in my lifetime in the university setting. And because of my age and that experience, I've seen circumstances based on the times. I don't think the times have changed a lot. It's just been repackaged, so to speak. Just as our laws have changed and keep being dismantled, it still has an effect on our society. But when I was originally an undergrad in North Carolina, during a time that same kind of statistics as Jacqueline just expressed, where the Black student population was probably 1,300 as opposed to 13,000 for the majority population of students who were not of color. And students did not have a lot of representation to look at in terms of professors or adjuncts even, or even counselors. There were no Black counselors that you could go to for support, resources, etc. So you were basically at risk for more harm as a student, and certainly as a student of color, because you got very little support. I also saw that the Black female professors, and there were very few, like all of one when I was there, she was so powerful. She got support from, a couple of her male Black counterparts, but basically as a lone wolf female, she had a really hard time because she advocated so strongly for the Black students. She was able to acquire a Black student union, which is a physical building of such, but then she ended up washing up on the river. They killed her. And no one spoke on it, but she mysteriously disappeared, broad daylight, and washed up on the river, while being en route to a, Little League baseball game for her son. Purse, keys, everything left on her kitchen counter. Door unlocked and open. So there have been circumstances where that was in the South. Fast forward, I am not an adjunct, but an actual guest lecturer at an HBCU, Howard University, where I got to see just the reverse. I saw a lot of Black female adjuncts and professors who did not get the kind of support that their male counterparts were receiving. And from where I sit, I think that all Black bodies carry trauma, carry harm. And then you're a Black female, it's even more of an affront trying to do excellence in a system, because we must always remember that there is a system that governs higher education. They vary sometimes from institution to institution. And these faculty members are, first of all, up against that system because it doesn't always support a woman of color. So she finds herself in the middle of a basically a political battle most days just to do her job. Currently, I have a friend who's a professor in San Diego, California. She's actually an adjunct, even though she's tenured on one of the campuses. She goes to 3 different schools, and the systems are so badly broken that she can't even defend the students because there's no support on the administration side for her to advocate for her students. And she has very few Black students, but lots of brown students. But because of overpopulation, lack of resources, she gets no support. So she's like a lone wolf trying to advocate, stay within the excellence of her own desires to serve the university, but more so putting the students first and trying to get them what they need within a broken system. So taking on the load for Black female professors, I see that they already carry a load from the trauma. Now they're trying to deal with a broken system. Now they're trying to survive in this tribe of administrators who don't support that. And so therefore, how can they give to the students when they're battling just to save themselves?
Wow, Clarence, those words gave me chills. Absolutely. That is unfortunately so much, speaks so much to the reality. Thank you for sharing that. Jonathan.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, Jonathan. There you go. I don't know, Angela, if you have something to add. I don't want to just move on too quickly. Okay. Jonathan, please.
yeah. Hi. Don't necessarily know how relevant this will be, but just kind of like on the subject of the history component and whatnot. It's always kind of interesting to me. I'm a young guy. There's like a certain perspective of, just where things are today. But then you every now and then get a reminder, like, this is not like that long ago. Like Ruby Bridges is still around. She was just on Stephen Colbert 2 weeks ago. So it's really odd that simultaneously this is a very old problem because BIPOC people have been in higher education for hundreds of years now, but it's still like such a recent problem too. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. That stood out to me too. And Danielle was talking about that earlier. Like this is something that there's literature on that goes back quite far. And I'm curious as to like people's thoughts around like what is the barrier here to figuring out how to make changes or to figure out a way to work through this? What do you see as the barriers, and maybe what have you experienced?
I kind of have an answer or just some reflections on the question
Yeah.
you posed and a response to you, Jonathan. That's exactly right. I think about the connection between history and why we're still having the same conversation in new ways a lot. When I did my master's research, it was focused on Black women's experience in higher education, and I got really discouraged because I learned that a lot of this, I wasn't bringing any new awareness. I was continuing to say the same thing that my ancestors have said, the people that have come before me have said for years. And so then I started wondering, well, why is no one listening? And the battle of feeling like no one is listening, it's not high priority because it does take so much to change, transform an organization. Transformational change is difficult, but it's necessary to sustain. And there's not often a lot of motivation to do that. So I find that there are people that are very passionate about it, but they are hit. They do face barriers. Some of the barriers have emerged tonight. I've heard like financial constraints and other things that make it really hard. Lack of support, lack of resources. That makes it very difficult to push through, and it's easy to burn out. And if you don't have the community to help fill your empty tank, then you just kind of become another voice that's either easy to ignore or become silent. And it's a really, really big problem. And I think that's why it's, no matter that we've been having this conversation for hundreds of years, we still have to talk about it. Asa, I see your hand.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Danielle. And thanks for the presentation and information. I was thinking about this idea of the history of addressing this issue, and especially in looking at some of Antioch University's own historical record, and coming across a huge report, like 100-page report from 1965 about retaining Black students and the problem of the disproportionate student body at Antioch College, and reading through it and seeing, these same conversations happening 50 years ago, and thinking about, why large institutions are so slow in reacting. I think one issue is kind of the angle that we approach it from, of maybe a top down, or a kind of at the highest levels there needs to be some kind of restructuring, but seeing how slow that moves, there's so much turnover in academia, there's so much bureaucracy, that often those things just stall out and they just spin wheels for a few years and then someone else gets hired. And I think kind of trying to take a really smaller approach, maybe this is the way I've been thinking, like just a person to person on your campus, building that community and trying to kind of retain this little flame and not let it go out, pass it to the next people who come in, seems to be something that works better than this kind of slow moving like juggernaut of the institution itself. And I was thinking also about how I don't think it's come up, but Claudine Gay at Harvard, and how long, hundreds of years to get a Black woman dean, and then 6 months to get rid of her, and the way that can so quickly just disappear. So I think this idea of maybe like a bottom-up approach, or while keeping an eye on the, not letting those in power off the hook, but maybe focusing more inward. I don't know how you feel about this as a kind of, you're on both sides of it. So
Yeah, I do see what you're saying. And when I was thinking about what to say tonight, or what I wanted to present, I was thinking about how we have to focus on systems. We have to focus that we know that individual solutions is not a way to address systemic issues. And so I didn't want to come into this space and make the room feel like each of us has the burden to do something about a problem that we've said has been existing for hundreds of years. But your comments bring me back to, what can we do in the meantime? it is so slow. The systems are so slow, and we can push, we can advocate, because change is happening. Dr. Gay did make it to Harvard, so that definitely says something. But how do we as individuals like show more care, create more caring spaces, have more caring relationships, show up for each other? Because that is what really matters, how we are in community as we wait for the top to get it.
I I just wanted to bring in the idea too that because it is something that is long withstanding, it's tough from all aspects because there's a trust factor that has to be built. And the trust factor takes so long. When I look at myself as a student, it didn't take me any um, lack of time to trust certain people when I got to AULA. But I know that that's not always the case. Even within the BIPOC community, we have to learn how to trust each other so that we can build these conditions. And in the difficulties of what Asa is saying, in order to build that community, it does take time, and it takes time together to understand where other people are coming from. When I think about getting to know you, Danielle, it took us some time, and we just jumped in because we were all wanting similar things and wanting similar things for each of our campuses. And that's something too that has to be addressed. We don't have the opportunities to even contact each other and know who's there and who's not because of the way things are set up now in the administrative fashion. Like I can't reach out to another, even, Black or Latinx or a student from the Middle East just because until I see them on the screen. And then I can say, hey, I'm glad you're here, welcome, whatnot, whatnot. But it has to go beyond that in order for us to be able to do exactly what Asa said, start small and build our community. And then our community as students would probably impact administration and vice versa. If administration was reaching out to us and reaching out to other professors, then it happens, obviously, because that's what happened on the Seattle campus.
Absolutely, Jacqueline. I think about building trust and how key that is, and just the state of the climate of the university right now, and how do we repair it? How do we spend more time focusing on repairing it when trust has been broken? This would come to mind. Thank you for that. Sarah Beth.
Thanks. Excuse me. I'd like to first acknowledge what Javon put in the chat about having support in Seattle with the Black Student Union and mentorship and and the call to consistency. I think, I personally love it, Danielle, when you talk about nerding out. So when you started with your data, I was just so happy, but what stuck with me since that time is that retention barrier slide. And I think about when I started teaching years and years ago, none of the things on that list were in the orientation. And it wasn't at Antioch that I was first trained to be a faculty member. And nobody told you these are all going to be things that'll be part of your experience in your own classrooms. And I think now to look at this list, I would have to say it's an important exercise for white faculty, especially, to look at this kind of list over and over again and say to ourselves, how do I respond when a student is dealing with isolation? How do I make them feel welcome? How do I make them feel that they have support? And what kind of relationship have I built on the idea that anything on this list, from that to pay inequities they may be dealing with in their life, to the grappling with the financial aid situation, which there's not a ton of support around, and in terms of how much aid people can get that they really actually need to live a life while they're spending time in academia. I think these kinds of questions can be very helpful for us to really think about, and to go further than think about, but to bring them up in conversations with students who can tell us the real situations that they're dealing with and the real experiences that they're having that will shape institutional understanding of what people are bringing to their academic life. I think the piece that Jacqueline mentioned and always mentions is relationship, that I love so much. And to your point, Sandra, in the chat of, we have this important role that we've filled, and Stephanie is onboarding, and what kind of support will we as an institution provide her in this journey of trying to figure out what we can all do together to change the situation for everyone.
I was just leaving silence because I felt like I was talking over Angela. I'm sorry, Angela, if I am.
No, it's okay. No, you all are really touching on some really important points. Yeah, that retention slide is a big one, Sarah Beth, to echo what you said. And just thinking about, like, even as a mentor to your BIPOC students, as a white faculty is important too. Like, being able to tell them, these are my resources and support in my community that I can expose you to and help you build connections with other folks, and investing in them to show them that you're happy that they're there and you want to keep them there and that they have a space there. Speaking as a student, I have one of my faculty members who I have to meet with very often, just because of that, because she gives me that, and she's a white faculty. And then I have Black and BIPOC folks who I meet with just because they can relate to some of this stuff and we can have those conversations. So I think it's just really important that, regardless of who you are and who you are representing, making that space welcoming and having those conversations to create a relationship where you actually get to know your students and understand the needs that they have that are unique to them is really important. For example, I'm in a class and there's someone who identifies as BIPOC, and they wanted to be able to speak up first. How do we create a safe space? We decided as a class that the BIPOC folks could have the floor first if there's time for conversation or discussion. But I'm a person who's like, no, I don't need to speak first. I'll talk when I want to talk. So you really have to kind of gauge, like, do they have a need for that, and who has that need, and how can we meet the needs of everyone in a way that's not equal but equitable, so everybody has opportunity to do well. I'm seeing the chat kind of go off. I see a hand here, so Asa, if you want to jump in, I'd love to hear what you wanted to add.
Well, thanks, Angela. I just have a question actually for both of you or those engaged with this. And I'm thinking kind of connecting it to our messy conversation last week, which was about how we teach writing and our approaches to that as a school. And thinking about like curriculum itself, because we've talked about a lot of other factors, but how much do you see the actual curriculum, what's being taught as a like what's being read in the classes, all of that as a factor in retention and recruiting too?
That's definitely a part of representation. I am a member of the BSU, and there were students in other programs that talked a lot about not being able to see themselves in the curriculum and how hard it is to connect with it when they don't see themselves. And not only that, but how they felt like they had to learn what Antioch was teaching, but do their own learning so that they can actually go out in the community and be equipped with the knowledge and tools that they need to support their community, the people that they were here to support. And that's double work for them to have to self-navigate. So certainly if the curriculum is diversified, just like the teachers in the room, then, or the staff, or just diversity across the board, it is beneficial and can help, I'll speak for myself, help me feel like I belong and like I'm more connected in the classroom. Asa, does that answer your question? That's where my mind went, but now I'm thinking, is that what he was asking?
Yeah, that's what I was asking. I wonder if there are specifics or at Antioch, but in particular about certain ways we could diversify the curriculum or approaches to how we teach that might better match with the communities we're in. But that's a big question. I don't expect you to be able to answer, and
I think
well, it's
that's,
already 5, so
I'm sorry, but that's such a good point. And I think, at least in our programs, we try and implement voices in the literature that are really doing the research on, like for me, for counseling, like Black psychology, and research that is really centered around Black and BIPOC marginalized identities and folks that are doing the work and integrating that into the curriculum. That has been something that's been helpful personally that I've used, and students seem to respond well from that. It gives sort of a more of a diverse voice to what, whatever literature they're reading, and even assignments that they're doing, giving them flexibility in how they complete those assignments. That's another way of kind of helping people to find ways that they can connect to the material that feels more meaningful for them. I can talk about that all day, so we can maybe do that offline.
It is 5 o'clock. I know that we usually do like
Yeah.
11 people. I do also want to acknowledge that I was a student in Sarah Beth's class, and Sarah Beth, not to put you on the spot, but you did a really good job of making sure that you included a range of materials. We read post-traumatic stress syndrome in your class, and you didn't make it about like, we're reading this so we can talk about Black issues or Black people. You connected it to the material that you wanted to teach that maybe wasn't race-based, but having like doing the reading on my own that was centering race and talking about issues of race, and then being able to connect it to larger themes and topics of the class was really helpful, and I really appreciated that. So I see you here. Thank you. You do a good job of that. I would love to see more of it at Antioch for sure. I don't know who does the let out of people. It is 5 o'clock. I am gonna stick around for if you want to continue this discussion, but I also want to respect everyone's time. And thank you for the invitation to have this conversation.
So I thought probably Sarah Beth would do that, but I will do that. It is a little after 5 o'clock. We want to thank Danielle and Angela for this conversation. If you need to go. If you can hang out, looks like they're going to be generous enough to hang out with us for another 15, 20 minutes. So we can continue this conversation more informally. Don't forget to come back next week as we talk about Black couples therapy with Erica Holmes and Yamante Cooper and their new book. So thanks for being here.
Thank you. Kat, I'm glad that you said that you can stay because this question connected, Ace's question connected to your presentation last week. I don't know if you have thoughts that you want to share about decolonizing the curriculum or anything. And if not, it's okay. I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but always curious what you have to say.
No, I really appreciate it. And I appreciate that this conversation is continuing. As somebody who is white and cisgender, I have a lot of privilege in the system, and I've benefited from being able to navigate, white linguistic structures. And when I look at curriculum and I think about what we're asking students to do, right, for me, it comes down to how do we incorporate anti-racism and universal design for learning at the same time to give space for everybody to kind of build their voices, but also walking that really fine line of creating space for people to push boundaries and test limits and test the structures that we've kind of reified over time, while really acknowledging that there are tangible barriers that even come with titles of papers, that come with the names that are printed on papers, that come with admissions, that come with job applications, right? None of those things are pretend. The racism that our students face as they leave Antioch and as they navigate inside, those are very, very real things. And one of the things that we struggle with in writing is how to embody the ideal, right? Multiple modes of representation, allowing students to cultivate their own voice and encouraging them to code mesh within their academic writing, and then acknowledging that the way that those pieces and those documents and those art pieces even are received by an outside white dominant white supremacist world, right? Like that is such a fine line for us to walk. And how to encourage our faculty to take deep looks at what they're asking students to do, not just what they're including on a syllabus, but what they're asking students to do with those things. I asked in the chat about an external racism review, and Asa, I appreciate your response. I went through one with former institution that I worked for, and the big question that faculty members asked at the end was, well, we've changed some of the readings on our syllabi and we've included a required diversity course. Is that good enough? And the blank stares that the evaluators gave the faculty members about, like, okay, so you made the bare minimum happen and you really just changed a couple of course titles. No, that's not enough. You need to stop microaggressing in your classroom. You need to stop looking directly at students of color when anything kind of comes up that might be attached to a person of color's perspective, right? Like, you need to stop tokenizing students in the classroom. You need to make sure that when you offer spaces to Black students, that those spaces are not necessarily open to white students and their perspectives. But I think, opening a floor for students of color to speak first it could go one of two ways, right? It either says, yes, your contributions are valuable, we want to offer you space, but it also communicates, hey, it's your responsibility to start the conversation and then carry it. So, those pieces of tension, I think, are always going to, or have historically existed and are very difficult to shift, because we have to weigh out what the burden is going to be for the change that we then end up passing on to those students or to those faculty members. It's all well and good for me to have great ideals about, like, making sure that students have the ability to write in their own voices and write in ways that are going to communicate well with their communities. But also, if they are moving into clinics that are run by, button up white people that want a particular level of diction to, you know, increase their credentials or to make them seem more whatever to a white audience, right? That's also not very helpful if we don't equip our students with the tools to navigate those very real structures of discrimination that begin with their submitting a resume through any sort of reader that kicks back on different names. And, you know, we can pull studies that show that, you know, depending on what your name spelling is, you know, where you're coming from, what your addresses are, right? There's so many layers of bias that our students are already facing, that teaching writing in inclusive ways gets more and more complicated, but in ways that we're going to have to take on. Like, there's just no choice. We have to make shifts in the way that we engage with and respond to student writing, and then what we expect them to be doing with it out in the wider world that is absolutely bound by white middle-class supremacist ideals. Because there's also the class layer that plays in, and the lack of opportunities, right? Like, that was not articulate whatsoever. So sorry for that, but it does reflect like the complicated things that are happening in my brain anytime I think about race and writing and where I am complicit or advocating. And there are days when I am both complicit in a system and I'm advocating for change. And that is a weird place for us all to live, because I think, you know, we're all kind of in that, working at Antioch at a social justice institution that has a, you know, very white upper administration that is making decisions that are not necessarily in the best interest of any of our students, faculty, or staff of color.
I love Kat. This so funny because when I was listening to everything you were saying, you've engulfed so many different entities at the same time. I mean, we've got our curriculum committee that looks through all of the information and it has to be approved. Whether it's there or whether it's missing, we have to go back and make sure that it's present. You have HR, you have training that's necessary. That's been a discussion on Messy Conversation. That training for our professors, for them to understand those microaggressions and things that are happening, or even to address the evaluations that are received. We don't even know where those evaluations go and what's done with them. And then you have the idea of students don't necessarily at our campus have a career center where they can go and get those type of critiques. The Writing Center is very, very good at having workshops. I have yet to see at any point in time, and I'm in the MFA program now, a workshop that is career-based towards our students in undergrad. In the MFA program, we have a whole semester following our graduation that we can utilize the resources from the deans and from the college. But in undergrad, that doesn't happen. And so there's a lot of different pieces that are missing that should be available to us as students. And that comes down to also hiring. That means that's an investment. It's an investment. It should be considered an investment in the student, in the university, but it should be considered a big investment, especially with admissions as well as part of the piece, in the students themselves, because the students bring more students if they feel that they're invested in. If they don't feel they're invested in, there goes your retention. Nobody's going to come back to somebody that didn't put time, money, love, care into them. And
one of the requests I'm making, Jacqueline, is for a career and professional technical writing specialist.
yeah,
As we're looking at like our new budgets, is, you know, where are the holes? And, you know, we offer workshops, but they don't necessarily align with when students are meeting. If you ever have a suggestion, I'm going to drop our workshop page in, and we have a request a workshop space. And we are always really happy to work with different departments or even individuals to create writing groups. So if one of the things that helps is having a space for, you know, BIPOC women to get together and write, let us know, and we can work on putting together writing groups. We're always very open to those. And there are definitely some weaknesses in what we've provided students. Some of those are because we are trying to de-silo out of these like 5 separate campus entities. And, you know, Ace has seen like all of the documents that are in the library about how many campuses we've started and abandoned, right? Like we're at the hundreds at this point of the number of campuses that pop up and close, but we want to make sure that we're sustainable in that. Sorry for speaking over you, Natasha. I see your hand up.
Hi, I'm Natasha Dion. I teach in the MFA program. I also teach at Yale and occasionally UC Riverside and UCLA. And I love that this conversation is happening. I got in here late, but I'm like, I saw it pop up in my email thing. I was like, oh, I gotta go, I gotta make it. So it's been such a pleasure to hear from everybody. I love, Kat, what you're saying about decolonizing, curriculums. And also I just wanted to add, because I was also a master's of psychology student at one point in my life. Besides being a lawyer, I did a psychology program at Fuller. And one of the things that I found that they weren't able to do is normalize what Kat is talking about. So the diverse curriculum. So it makes writers of color, especially, or students of color, BIPOC students, feel like they always have to only care about race above everything else, which isn't how it should be. So like in the psychology room, if I'm talking about therapy, during the George Floyd protest, everybody was like all on edge about, oh, we got to talk about George Floyd. If it's a Black, client who's coming in, we got to talk about race and things like that. And at the same time, COVID was going on. I was like, even though it's in the air, COVID is in the air, we're all on lockdown, race is in the air, we're all facing it. Not every Black person or every Latino or any other person who comes in the room wants to talk about COVID right now or wants to talk about race. Maybe we have just problems or issues that, that anybody would want to deal with right now. What I'm saying is by normalizing, not ignoring, but normalizing those conversations. So in my classes, if we're going to be talking about writing sex scenes, I'm bringing out queer love stories. And I'm not making no announcement about that. I'm like, we're going to have this conversation. Okay, now let's look at, these points. What makes this love story strong? Here are the 12 methods of arousal, basically, in all human history. So let's talk about it without othering people, but normalizing all types of relationships. I think that's part of it. And also, let's see, Jacqueline was talking about bringing in other students. I don't refer any students, especially students of color, anywhere where they don't have faculty that can support them, that look like them. So for instance, when UC Riverside is like, oh, we want to do a story, on you so you could talk about why students should come there. I said, I'm not going to do that when there's no faculty that represent any of them. Until you can hire properly, that recognizes a population you're trying to attract, I'm not bringing people into that. Why would I do that? To further traumatize students. We need to pay people, especially Black women, Black teachers, usually have more credentials than anybody else. When we talk about number of degrees and level of, we need to pay people accordingly. I love unionization, but sometimes it doesn't reflect. It's just like feminism, white feminism. It doesn't reflect our individual needs, especially as Black women who are overeducated. I have a law degree, which I've had for 20 years. I practice, I have my psychology, just all this. And all these years of experience at different universities, and I still get paid as the same as a newcomer because I'm also like, you know what? Yeah, we need to unionize. Yeah, it's important that we do this stuff. And so we don't recognize there's different ways that we ignore the work of different communities. So it's not like you need to be handing out, but also recognizing the privilege of having especially a Black male or Black woman or different people of color teaching in front of a class, because most of you have never had a teacher who was an African American woman, until you get maybe to this point. So it's a real privilege and it's a benefit. And I think once the university starts recognizing that, maybe we'll be able to handle that a little bit differently.
Well, you just brought up enough issues for a whole nother messy conversation. I love it. My brain is exploding. Thank you so much for that sharing.
Yes, thank you. I again was trying to step on Angela, but thank you for being here and sharing your perspective. As you were talking, I was thinking about how I got my first Black teacher. I was so proud, my first semester of my doc program. And a lot of people don't make it that far into a doc program. So that's a long time to wait for your first Black teacher. Not to say I haven't had some amazing educators that have been very instrumental to me in my journey, but certainly I agree with what you said, and I appreciate you for saying it.
And I didn't want to bust out Dr. Gill's, but I had Dr. Gill's classes. I took every single one as every other Black student on campus took. And then when I come across people in the MFA program, we're talking about different topics and they're talking about their writing. I'm like, you need to go back and take a Dr. Gill's class because you're talking about the Black church and you need to know a little bit more so you can get that into the writing. More intense writing is what we're trying to provide, at least among the writers that I talk to in MFA that are ethnic women. And those classes mean a lot. The classes that I took with Dr. Gills put so much on the page because of the resources, and then that leads something else, and that leads something to something else. And then there's that mentorship piece. If I have a gap, I will not hesitate to ask for help. And I'm always thankful that she is there to offer that help. Otherwise, you know, a lot of us would, like you said, suffer during sometimes, and for the most part, afterwards, because we have to maintain our resources, and that's the big part of it. That's what we're all trying to do. So I didn't want to throw you under the bus in front of everybody, but I had to say it.
I haven't had the pleasure of taking a course, but I always feel like it's an honor to be in the room with you, Dr. Gills, and you've met with BSU. You've been just always willing to let us know that even though we're not on the same campus, you're here to support us and you bring a wealth of knowledge. So I have a lot of respect for you. And Jacqueline is always pushing your classes. Thank you for what you do for Antioch and the students here.
It's certainly my pleasure. It's about the students and it's about raising an awareness and providing the information. And as you all have pointed out, it's about providing a space, a safe space for students, for them to grow. And I think one thing Jacqueline said earlier, and then just another young lady just said, why would you ask students to come to a space where they are not going to be supported or they can't see themselves? And I think that if we want to really support BIPOC students and retain them and also get additional students in, they need to see themselves. And we need to really work together on that. And thank both of you for your contributions today. Marvelous.
Those feel like good parting words. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you both for this excellent, messy conversation.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you, Messy Conversations. Hopefully, I'll be back another time to continue this conversation. I hope all of you join. I'll see you
Yes. You must come back again. And come back next week if you can.
next week.
Thank you.